and welcome to the world as we see it. Particular welcome if this is your first visit to us. So of course, very welcome as you join us here in Pattaya in Thailand. My name is Lloyd Hobart Mitchell, and I'm an ordinand with the St. George's congregation here. It's a small church, it's a small chapel that we use, and during these COVID times we're only able to have 5 people inside the building. My formation, my training, is being overseen by Father David Price, who is the current chaplain of St. George's. That was a bit loud. So that's Father David liking the post just now. So he's the chaplain of St. George's, and my formation is going on in context from October. I should be starting, well, I will be starting an online ministry course for 3 years with Sarum College in the UK. It's an online course, and so my actual formation in context will continue to be overseen by Father David Price. Now, I should also mention, he gets a special mention because I always try and give him credit. Father Tom McCusker is the former chaplain of St. George's, and I meet with him every Tuesday, and we talk about Tillich. Okay, and we're going to come to Tillich later on today. Now, I should mention 2 people. Hoss 00312 has followed 2 minutes ago, and so Hoss 00312, you are very, very welcome, and hopefully we see you a bit more often. I'm very grateful for the follow, so thank you for that. And I should make a special mention also for Elizabeth, who's in Australia and watching at the moment. So welcome one and all. All of those who have seen us before, welcome back. And what we're going to do today, and it's become a little bit of a custom for us, is we're going to shoot over to the Church Times and have a look at the headlines there. So I'm just signing in. From time to time, the sign-in of this becomes more difficult. I don't know why. We always have to go, hymns ancient and modern, yes, signing in, and it takes a little bit of time, and I'm not really sure why it's so complicated or slow, but maybe that's because I'm in Thailand, and also when I sign in, I'm streaming, so it could well be that the broadband here is being maxed out with the stream. That would make sense. Okay, now where are we? We are just here. There's the Church Times, yes, and we're looking now at the Church Times. So, at the very top, and unsurprising really, I mean, only a week or so ago, we prayed for the people of Afghanistan, and so I'm not too surprised that they lead the headlines on every news outlet, including the Church Times. So they're saying Australia could take 20,000 Afghan refugees, church leaders say. And I agree. Now, what I've done is I've shared the link to the Church Times in our Twitch chat box there. And as we go and look through things, we'll be sharing more links as well. So Australia could take 20,000 Afghan refugees, church leaders say. And I can't help but think that, and I've had conversations about this, and I'm sure everyone has. Afghanistan has been used as a pawn in the Great Game, as it used to be known, for more than 150 years. And it's also true that every country which has gone to war in Afghanistan ultimately has to turn around and go out of Afghanistan. But nevertheless, not before inflicting a huge amount of pain on the Afghan people. Now, for whatever reasons, Britain's been there more than once, and I can't help but think it's such a shame that the withdrawal and of course ultimately there had to be a withdrawal from Afghanistan. There had to be. I should also point out, I should always point out this. So the world as we see it is it's full of opinion, right? This Twitch stream, this stream that goes to Facebook and YouTube as well, it's full of opinion, okay? And I'll share my opinion. I'm not speaking on behalf of St George's congregation. I'm certainly not speaking on behalf of Father David or Father Tom. It's my own opinion. And I can't help but feel very sad that the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which had to happen one day, I suppose, couldn't have been done, not as a unilateral decision by the greater of the forces there, America. But I wish there had been some kind of decision to hand over the administration to the United Nations peacekeeping corps, so that every country which is able could have had their own peacekeepers in place, continuing the work of safeguarding those folks and the transition work which had been done for the last 20 years. It could have been done with peacekeepers. And should, ISIS or Taliban or whoever have attacked the United Nations peacekeepers, then the kind of the reaction, the ultimate reaction, would have come from an international body. Maybe that was impossible. Maybe there were too many countries in the mix who would have vetoed that plan. And so maybe they just didn't bother doing it in the end. But I do think it's such an opportunity missed. And as we watch now, Afghanistan descend very, very quickly into what must be, for so many people, an unbearable reality. And desperately sad for all of those people. And I do hope that all, or as many as folk as need to get out, where they believe that they are at a risk, to persecution, risk of persecution, for whatever reason, whether it's because of their gender or their faith or the work that they had been doing or their sexuality. I hope they're able to get out and live the rest of their lives elsewhere around the world safely. It's terrible, isn't it? It's really terrible. Now, we've got the UK churches are aiding refugees from Kabul, and we know that would happen. I mean, we've read a lot of stories, I've read a lot of stories, saying individuals are offering their bedrooms to refugees, and if I were in the UK, certainly we would be doing the same. I think it's dreadful. Now, Church in Wales governing body to debate same-sex marriage blessings. So that's an interesting one. It's I say that flippantly. It's not just an interesting one for lots of people. This is an important milestone in terms of equality, I suppose, and in terms of how the church responds to changes in society, things which were profoundly unacceptable 100 years ago, but these days are acceptable by society, by many folk in society, and the church is having to respond to that. Now, in the Church of England, there is a process underway. It's been underway for some time now, called Living in Love and Faith, and that encourages all churches, individual parishes, to have a conversation with itself and with the wider church about its view on same-sex blessings, marriages, right? And that process is underway. We will see what happens there. Now, the next one, churches and charities step up again while schools are out for summer. And I think this is really important. I know in Faversham, where I used to live, Faversham in the UK, they've only just had a big fun day event in the recreation ground in Faversham. And it's, by all accounts, I saw posts on Facebook, so it must be true, that it was a great success. Lots of people turned up, lots of activities went ahead. And I think it's essential that the whole of the community steps up to do more for young people and families, because we've only just gone through this lockdown. Many people have, here in Thailand, we continue to be in lockdown with curfews, and it's terribly damaging. My wife and I have a son who's 4 years old, and I know that because he hasn't been to kindergarten or school since the 12th of February last year, there are all manner of milestones which he hasn't been able to copy his peers, right? And it's one of those, I'm sure it's immeasurable, the effect it has had on him now, and the effect it will have on him for years to come. But the value of children spending time with each other is essential. And so as our countries, the UK specifically, but other countries open up, I think there needs to be more activities so children can play, can value each other. And if the church can be at the heart of that, then more the good, in my opinion. So, look, remains of an Anglo-Saxon monastery discovered on the banks of the River Thames. That's exciting. We're going to carry on down, see what else there is before we move on to any reading. Want children in charge in church. Want children in church, put them in charge. And I think this is good in terms of children's activities. I haven't read this, so I don't know what it's saying, but I think this seems obvious. If you want anyone in church, then you do need to engage them somehow in the kind of church, in the kind of worship that they are going to be involved in. And we can't just say, right, there's a kids club, there's a plastic box of toys, there's a bunch of printed out sheets for colouring in, get on with it. Children these days are not the same as children as we were, 30, 40 years ago, and certainly not the same as children were 70 years ago. On some levels they are, of course, but on so many levels, with technology the way it is, the fact that, I have conversations with children in China, some of them as young as 6, and they have their own mobile phones. They're able to access different messaging platforms. So when I send a word, because they can't pronounce it, so I might send the phonetics. And these children of 6 years old are able to scroll their phone and read phonetics. So, I'm sure that's an extreme case, but children have a huge amount of access to technology these days. They are bombarded by all manner of messages which compete with their attention, whether we like it or not. Normally those messages, or very often those messages, are, designed and paid for by multi-billion-dollar corporations And so they've been tested. The corporations don't spend a lot of money on something unless they've been tested by all of these steering groups and working groups and everything like that. And so the church has to somehow compete for children's attention. And the only way to do that is to engage them in, the kinds of clubs, the kinds of activities they want to do. I remember, that phrase, too cool for school, springs to mind. And actually, engaging them in a conversation, being interested in them, listening to them, and incorporating what they are saying in the activities of those clubs means they'll come back for more. And that's got to be a good thing. After all, the children, and I know it's a cliche, it's even a song, isn't it? Children are the future, aren't they? Children are our future, and they are the future for the church. So I'm not surprised that it says put them in charge. So a few books this week. There's a couple of books I'm interested in having a look at. So The Awakened Brain, that seems good. And a letter to a friend about the casting of Lot by Thomas Aquinas. So, these two here, the Oxford Handbook of the Reception of Aquinas and the De Sortibus, they both look good as well, don't they? I love looking at books. I really do. So I think that's how we ended up getting one of the books we read every day, which is How Not to Read the Bible. I think I saw that in the Church Times book review. So that's how we ended up getting that, I think. Maybe it was on a list as well from somebody who suggested I read it. Let's have a look at the cartoon, because humour's always good. Now, why is that all blurred? It says, that's very good, isn't it? So, there we have a priest in his vestments, and on the back, how's my celebrating, with a mobile telephone number where people in the congregations would be able to call in their opinion. Derek welcomed feedback from the congregation. Of course, it's ridiculous and true, right? We're all asking for comments constantly. I know I ask for comments all the time while I do this, but it's quite funny to see that, isn't it? It's a bit like when drivers are driving down the road saying, "How's my driving?" and there are these telephone numbers, which I actually think is a very good idea, by the way. I've used a couple of those phone numbers in the past to tell people when I've been cut up or seen other people driving very badly. So I do think they're a very good idea for companies in terms of their reputation. I think it's very funny having that. Very good. Now, let's go over. We're going to shift gear now. That was a bit of a Radio 2 link. So shifting gear from long-distance lorry drivers and feedback about their driving to the life and work of a priest. And this is our book by John Pritchard. And we are up to chapter number 5. We got to chapter number 5. And for those of you who don't know what John Pritchard looks like, then I'll show you. And there he is. There's John Pritchard. And he's written this brilliant book. I say it's a brilliant book. It's certainly is a very easy read. It's very easy to relate to. And it's for folk like me who want to know a bit more about the nuts and bolts. So it was recommended by the vicar of Christchurch in Bangkok, the former vicar of Christchurch, Reverend Andy. And he sent me a great long list of books that I should read, and this was near the top. So we got hold of a copy, and here we are. So let's come over now, and I'll start reading. Chapter 5, Multilingual Interpreter, Exploring the Landscape of Faith. The priest as apologist. So how do you answer that? How can someone believe in God when tens of thousands of people die in such a horrific earthquake? I was sitting in a local radio studio reviewing the newspapers on the morning show. A woman had phoned in to protest about belief in God, and I had to find the bite-sized answer, which was all time would allow. Another occasion, Bishop, why is the church so nasty to gays? Or again, don't you find it dispiriting that the church is on its way out? To young people, it's just naff. Hard questions are the stuff of the front line, and even if they're not articulated, they're always in the air. The priest is the most visible symbol of the church and the most vulnerable. He or she has to be able to handle the tough questions. It's the role of the apologist. Now, from time to time, you might just about be able to hear the frogs in our garden. It's been raining here for the last 24 hours. And the frog, I'm leaving the book for a moment just to tell you, because I could hear these noises, and to me they always sound like cows. They're rather loud and they're mooing in the garden. So if you do hear that, that's a background noise we are unable to screen out. So it's the role of the apologist. The pastoral imperative. The most obvious place where the priest encounters a spoken or unspoken challenge to faith is at a funeral. As C.S. Lewis put it, every tombstone is a monument to unanswered prayer. Of course, a funeral is also the least appropriate place for an apologetic tour de force. The sickbed, the bereavement visit, and the funeral service need intense sensitivity from the priest as he or she tries to match the moment with an appropriate response. The underlying questions may not require any kind of reasoned answer at that particular point, but the deeper need remains, as demonstrated by the ingrained responses to tragedy that so often emerge. I don't know what he did to deserve this, or God must have taken him for a reason. Listening to people going through the kind of dark valleys that we may not even be able to imagine teaches us humility and the importance of silence. But it doesn't obviate the need for a priest to be able to offer some reference points at the appropriate time. The priest is an apologist as part of being a pastor. Giving people a more mature framework of interpretation for their hard experiences is part of helping someone to grow and to live more wisely. The need to be able to defend and commend the faith, a good definition of apologetics, is provided by other pastoral encounters too. Oops. Can hear a dog barking there. Baptism preparation elicits all kinds of strange ideas about God and the church, as may chance conversations with the postman, the local MP, or even the church warden. In previous existence, the priest could avoid these forays into disputed territory with a laugh, a throwaway remark, or a promise to ask the vicar. Now, however, you are the vicar, and you are the one who has to make the response. And you have to judge whether the invitation to respond is a serious one, at what level to answer it, what language to use, and whether you are equipped to answer in any case. The apologetic discernment is not a straightforward matter, but the priest is the one who carries the responsibility. Clearly, there is a particular sharpness to this apologetic role for sector ministers and ministers in secular employment. They are operating in secular territory without the normal polite conversations that usually still accompany the work of the parish priest. Such ministers have important lessons to teach the rest of the church about the challenges that the post-secular world is throwing down. As ever, one of the best ways to improve our pastoral and apologetic effectiveness is to review conversations after they've happened. What was really going on there? What was she really asking? Did I ask the most appropriate questions to clarify the issue? Did the response seem to help her at all? What might I have said differently? Another way is to listen to bishops being interviewed on the morning show and ask how you would have handled it better. So, what we're going to do is leave it there. Okay, so we've read 2 pages, and we will come back tomorrow with the young people imperative, and that's related a little bit to what we were having a chat about with the church times. So that's very apt. We'll come back to that tomorrow. Very good. John Pritchard never fails us. He's very, very good. What I will start to do is, as we're reading these books, I will share the links on Amazon in order then you can see these books and buy them yourselves. So The Life and Work of a Priest, and by John Pritchard. Okay, and very good it is too. There we are. Now, we will go over now to the next book, which is How Not to Read the Bible. Now, for anyone who's just joined us, my name is Lloyd Hobart Mitchell, and I'm an ordinand here at St George's Congregation in Pattaya in Thailand. And you're very, very welcome if you've only come in part way through. My formation, my training, is being conducted in context and overseen by Father David Price. And Father David Price is the chaplain of St George's Church. Now, his job is to teach me what to do inside the chapel and all manner of other stuff outside the chapel, frankly, in the parish and in terms of pastoral care. I also meet with Father Tom every Tuesday, and we talk about Paul Tillich's systematic theology. And so that's a little bit of an introduction in case you came along only halfway through. Of course, if you have watched this, if you are watching this, it would help us hugely if you're watching on Twitch, if you could follow, if you're watching on Facebook, if you could like our fan page, and if you're watching on YouTube, maybe you could subscribe by hitting the button down there somewhere. Okay, now let's get on. We're going to look at Dan Kimball's How Not to Read the Bible. So, we are on the section, I think we were, where were we? We were on the section down here. and I didn't mark it, which is a little bit annoying because it was a bit late yesterday and I was a bit tired. So I think we were starting in the early 1980s. That's where we are. In the early 1980s, if someone had said, "I'm going to surf the web," those words would not have made sense. A person hearing that would have thought of someone surfing on a surfboard somewhere in the ocean. They might have guessed that the web was some kind of spider web, but it wouldn't have made sense because those words had different meanings back then. It's true, isn't it? That's true for locations as well. In my town in California, we often say we are going over the hill. All of us locals know it means we are taking a specific road over the mountain when we go from our town over to San Jose. But if you don't know the local context, hearing going over the hill could mean hiking over a hill in a state park near you, or being so old you're over the hill, neither of which has anything to do with the original context. There was a song that came out in 1963 called Puff the Magic Dragon by folk artists Peter, Paul and Mary. The chorus contained these lyrics: "Puff the Magic Dragon lived by the sea and frolicked in the autumn mist in the land called Honolulu." The song, and I remember that song when I was a child, I loved it. The song was extremely popular and even reached number 2 in the music charts. Around that time, there were the beginnings of a counter-cultural revolution, with a new generation starting to reject the social and ethical values of past generations. Drug experimentation, and let me just change that so you can feel like you're with me in the room, which is a little bit better. So drug experimentation was becoming more prevalent, and in the thinking of younger generations, the song Puff the Magic Dragon was rumoured to be something more than a childhood song about a mythical dragon. People began interpreting the lyrics based on their world view and saw it as a song written about marijuana smoking. Newsweek magazine even had a cover story about covert drug messages being part of songs. The rumour, based on the cultural views and assumptions of the time, was that puff was an obvious metaphor for smoking pot. Autumn mist, another part of the lyrics, was understood to be a symbolic reference to the clouds of marijuana smoke, and the land of Honolulu was interpreted as a reference to the Hawaiian village of Hanalei, which was known for its particularly potent marijuana plants. Then one day, the authors of the song made a statement to clarify what they meant when they wrote the song. They clearly and emphatically stated the song had no reference or hidden meaning whatsoever to drug culture. Co-writer of the song, Peter Yarrow, said, "When Puff was written, I was too innocent to know about drugs. What kind of a mean-spirited SOB would write a children's song with a covert drug message?" And the other co-writer, Leonard Lipton, said, "Puff is about loss of innocence and having to face an adult world. It's surely not about drugs. I can tell you that at Cornell in 1959, no one smoked grass. I find the fact that people interpret it as a drug song annoying. It would be insidious to propagandize about drugs in a song for little kids." I share this to show how easy it can be to take our worldview and then press it into something we read or hear, interpreting it through our lens. We can look at specific words and dissect them, and use complicated contemporary analysis to do all this. Eventually, though, we need to step back and look at the more fundamental question: What was the author originally saying? We cannot simply read our own understandings into the meaning of a word or statement someone else wrote or said. But when we look at some of the bizarre sounding parts of the Bible, we have to try to discover who the original audience was and view the text through their lens, not ours. If we don't, the possibilities for confusion are endless. So that's the end of chapter 2. Okay, I think that's a good place to stop because it means we can start tomorrow at the beginning of chapter 3, which says, never read a Bible verse. I quite like this book. I think Dan Kimball, again, similar to John Pritchard, writes in a way which certainly resonates with me. I'm well able to read it and understand it, and the little anecdotes that they give us are very, very, easily relatable, and so far, so good. So far, I think that the headings are intentionally provocative, but actually, once we get into the meat of it, actually, it's not that provocative. It's not that controversial at all. Dan Kimball, actually, he just helps us understand the Bible, doesn't he? That's what he's doing, and that's very helpful. It's very useful. Now, we're going to turn our attention now to someone else who wanted to help us understand the Bible, and that is Mr. Paul Tillich. And Paul Tillich wrote this book. It's 427 pages of reading. This print anyway, and it's been lent to me by Father Tom McCusker, the former chaplain of St. George's. So we are up to page 181, and we're doing well, and with your help we will continue to do well. So I can't tell you how much I value the fact that there's somebody else there listening to me read. It's very useful. When I was set the task by Tom to read this and understand it and discuss it every Tuesday, I must tell you that my progress was incredibly slow. I was reading it on my own, and I found the language of the text impenetrable. I found it very, very difficult, and so being able to to read it with you guys is very useful. Now, this is a picture of Paul Tillich. He's the person who wrote the book, and so there he is. He's the son, or he was the son of a Lutheran minister in Germany. He took part in the First World War, obviously fighting for the losing side, and after the First World War, as National Socialism came to the fore, Tillich was able to leave Germany and move to America, where he lectured in New York for many years, I presume the rest of his life. But during that time, anyway, in the 60s and 70s, he obviously wrote this book. This was published I think it was officially at 69 or early 70s, and it's called Systematic Theology. So it's certainly not for the weak, but I do encourage folk, if you're interested in it, if you like the little snippet I read, then of course go over to Amazon and buy your own copy and enjoy. So now let's get going, page 181, in the chapter which is called Being and the Question of God. So it says, the growth of the individual is the most obvious example of self-transcendence based on self-conservation. It shows very clearly the simultaneous interdependence of the two poles. Inhibition of growth ultimately destroys the being, which does not grow. Misguided growth destroys itself, and that which transcends itself without self-conservation. An example of wider scope is biological evolution from lower or less complex forms of life to higher and more complex forms. It is this example, more than anything else, which has inspired the philosophy of process and of creative evolution. Self-transcendence and self-conservation are experienced immediately by man in man himself, just as the self on the subhuman level is imperfect and in correlation with an environment, while on the human level the self is perfect and in correlation with a world. So self-transcendence on the subhuman level is limited by a constellation of conditions, while self-transcendence on the human level is limited only by the structure which makes man what he is, a complete self which has a world. On the basis of achieving self-conservation, the preservation of his humanity, man can transcend any given situation. He can transcend himself without limits in all directions, just because of this basis. His creativity breaks through the biological realm to which he belongs and establishes new realms, never attainable on a non-human level. Man is able to create a new world of technical tools and a world of cultural forms. In both cases, something new comes into being through man's grasping and shaping activity. Man uses the material given by nature to create technical forms which transcend nature, and he creates cultural forms which have validity and meaning. Living in this form, these forms, he transforms himself while originating them. He is not only a tool for their creation, he is, at the same time, their bearer, and the result of their transforming effect upon him. His self-transcendence in this direction is indefinite, while the biological self-transcendence has reached its limits in him. Any step beyond that biological structure, which makes intentionality and historicity, that's a word, historicity, I've not heard before, but that's a good word, possible, would be a relapse, a false growth, a destruction of man's power of indefinite cultural self-transcendence. Superman, in a biological sense, was James Wilson. James, I don't know if you're watching, but great to see you, and welcome. So we are reading at the moment, this is Paul Tillich's systematic theology, and we read a couple of pages every day, really. So let's carry on. Superman, in a biological sense, which would be less than man, for man has freedom, and freedom cannot be transpassed biologically. We're going on now to section 5, which is freedom and destiny, within the chapter Being and the Question of God. The third ontological polarity is that of freedom and destiny, in which the description of the basic ontological structure and its elements reaches both its fulfillment and its turning point. Freedom in polarity with destiny is the structural element which makes existence possible, because it transcends the essential necessity of being without destroying. In view of the immense role the problem of freedom has played in the history of theology, it is surprising to see how little ontological inquiry into the meaning and nature of freedom is carried on by modern theologians, or even how little the results of previous inquiries are used by them. For a concept of freedom is just as important for theology as a concept of reason. Revelation cannot be understood without a concept of freedom. Man is man because he has freedom. But he has freedom only in polar interdependence with destiny. The term destiny is unusual in this context. Ordinarily, one speaks of freedom and necessity. However, necessity is a category and not an element. Its contrast is possibly not freedom. Whenever freedom and necessity are set over against each other, necessity is understood in terms of mechanistic determinacy, and freedom is thought of in terms of well, this is a very long phrase. So indeterministic contingency. Right, so I kind of stumbled over that. Apologies for that. Again, another new phrase I think my brain has never seen before. So, very good. Indeterministic contingency. Neither of these interpretations grasp the structure of being as it is experienced immediately in the one being who has the possibility of experiencing it because he is free. That is, in man. Man experiences the structure of the individual as the bearer of freedom within the larger structures to which the individual structure belongs. Destiny points to this situation in which man finds himself facing the world to which at the same time he belongs. So, very interesting stuff. This idea, that we, human beings, make our own environment and then are formed by our environment as we continue then to change it and make it, and we then change over time. So that's my simple summary, right? That's my simple understanding. That's what I've understood from this Tillich so far this evening. So yeah, maybe if that's at odds from what you understand, then you're very welcome to comment on Facebook or YouTube or Twitch. Now, the methodological perversion of much ontological inquiry is more obvious in the doctrine of freedom than at any other point. The traditional discussion of determinism and indeterminism necessarily is inclusive because it moves on a level which is secondary to the level on which the polarity of freedom and destiny lies. Both conflicting parties presuppose that there is a thing among other things called will, which may or may not have the quality of freedom. But by definition, a thing as a completely determined object lacks freedom. The freedom of a thing is a contradiction in terms. Therefore, determinism always is right in this kind of discussion, but it is right because, in the last analysis, it expresses the tautology that a thing is a thing. Indeterminism protests against the deterministic thesis, pointing to the fact that the moral and the cognitive conscious presupposes the power of responsible decision. However, when it draws the consequences and attributes freedom to an object or a function called will, indeterminism falls into a contradiction in terms and inescapably succumbs to the deterministic tautology. Indeterministic freedom is the negation of a deterministic necessity, but the negation of necessity never constitutes experienced freedom. It asserts something absolutely contingent, a decision without motivation. an unintelligible accident, which is in no way able to do justice to the moral and the cognitive consciousness for the sake of which it is invented. Both determinism and indeterminism are theoretically impossible because, by implication, they deny their claim to express truth. Truth presupposes a decision for the true against the false. Both determinism and indeterminism make such a decision unintelligible. Freedom is not a fashion of a function, the will, but of man, that is, of that being who is not a thing, but a complete self and a rational person. It is possible, of course, to call the will the personal centre, and to substitute it for the totality of the self. Voluntaristic psychologies would support such a procedure, but it has proved to be very misleading, as the deadlock in the traditional controversy about freedom indicates. One should speak of the freedom of man, indicating that every part and every function which constitutes man, a personal self, participates in his freedom. This includes even the cells of his body, insofar as they participate in the constitution of his personal centre. That which is not centred, that which is isolated from the total process of the self. So, of the self, either by natural or artificial separation, is determined by the mechanism of stimulus and response, or by the dynamism of the relation between the unconscious and the conscious. However, it is impossible to derive the determinacy of the whole, including its non-separated parts, from the determinacy of the isolated parts. Ontology, the whole precedes the parts and gives them their character as parts of this special whole. It is possible to understand the determinacy of isolated parts in the light of the freedom of the whole, namely, as a partial disintegration of the whole. But the converse is not possible. Now, I thought midway through tonight's reading of Tillich, I thought I had a grip on it. I thought I understood. I thought it was about how mankind, creates our environment and how we then react to it. And I thought I had it. And then we carried on, and I feel like I've lost it again. So we're going to have to leave all of those words percolating for the night. We'll have to sleep on that one. And tomorrow, have a think about it. And we're going to start tomorrow on page 184. We've made progress. 184. And we'll start where it says, freedom is experienced as deliberation. Very good. So, as has become our custom, what we will now be doing is going over to the most excellent website provided by the Church of England entitled Daily Prayer, and I will share on Twitch the link to where we view that, and so anyone who wants to see it can, and we will go in. Now, what I would like to do, we've had a bit of a tough day here, and I won't go into the details, but suffice to say it's been a bit of a tough day. And I would really like to reflect on the value of family and friends and the family that church represents. I say this because we started the day, our small family started the day with what appeared to be an insurmountable problem. And I did what any man could have done, and I asked a number of friends whether they would be able to help us to resolve this insurmountable problem. And in the end, it was my sister who helped. And certainly by kicking off the solution in the biggest way that she could. And then that got complicated because here I am in Thailand and there she is in England. And actually, I then spoke to a couple of people from St George's congregation, and they put in place a short-term solution until my sister's solution comes along. And as I say, all of this without explanation because it's unnecessary, but suffice to say that where we started the day with an insurmountable problem, my blood family and my church family stepped in and solved the problem that I could not have done. And I can't express in words how grateful I am to them, and how lucky I am, and what a blessing it is to have them in my life. And so before we pray, I suppose I wanted at least to give credit where it was due, because that's what I'll be praying about. I'll be tonight, as I say my prayers before sleep, I'll be thinking of how blessed we are, amazingly blessed. So, visit, we beseech thee, O Lord, this place, and drive from it all the snares of the enemy. Let thy holy angels dwell herein to preserve us in peace. And may thy blessings be upon us evermore. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. So, thank you all of you. Very pleased to see James Wilson's name there. So he's an old friend from Whitstable in England. I'm probably going to see if he's around and maybe drop him a message or give him a call. So thank you very much, everyone. Until tomorrow, I will leave you saying with prayers and best wishes.